My younger brother raised his glass in front of his fiancée's family and said, "Here's to building a real career, something my sister never did." Her parents laughed. Dad clinked his glass with him, while I sat there, as the sister who had never made anything of herself. Nobody knew I'd quietly guaranteed the loan that built his company, or that he was hiding a debt from the woman marrying him. I set down my fork, smiled, and said one sentence that would empty his glass for good. But let me start from the beginning. I truly appreciate you taking the time to listen. Before we begin, drop a comment and tell me how are you feeling today. In one word, your perspective might be exactly what someone else needs to read. Just a quick note. This story includes some fictional elements added to highlight the lesson. What matters most is the message it carries. The leather menu felt heavier than it should have, as I watched my brother introduce me to his future in-laws with a smile that didn't quite reach his description of my career. The Union League's private dining room smelled like old money and fresh lilies. Crystal chandeliers caught the March evening light, casting everything in the kind of golden glow that made even awkward family dinners look like they belonged in a magazine. Saskia Delaney, 29, and confident in the way people who work in hospitality marketing always seem to be, was bridging both families with practiced ease. "Mom, Dad, this is Corbin's sister Elodie," she said, gesturing toward me with genuine warmth. "She works in finance." Glenn Delaney, 61, with the sharp eyes of a man who'd spent decades supplying contractors and learning when projections deserved scrutiny, leaned forward. "Finance? What area specifically?" Before I could answer, my brother Corbin, 33, and wearing his success like a well-tailored jacket, stepped in with easy confidence. "Elodie does some finance work, consulting or something," he said, waving his hand dismissively. "But wait until you hear about the new venue we're opening in the main line." The build-out alone, I felt the erasure land like a physical thing. Across the table, my mother Phyllis, 67, a retired principal who'd spent decades reading what students left unsaid, caught my eye. Her expression didn't change, but I saw her spine straighten slightly. Marlene Delaney, 58, with the practiced warmth of someone whose fundraising career had taught her to read donor hesitation before it showed on faces, smiled at me. "We're so thrilled to finally meet Corbin's family. He speaks so highly of all of you." My father Albert, 68, and beaming with the uncomplicated pride of a retired appraiser who'd built his career valuing what could be seen and touched, nodded enthusiastically. "Your future son-in-law has built something really impressive." "3 locations now?" "Going on 4, Corbin said. "The expansion timeline is aggressive, but when you have momentum, you have to capitalize." I sat with that question, pressing quietly against my ribs. The one about how many times a person could be erased at the same table before she stopped expecting to be seen at all. It drifted through my mind as I watched Glenn ask thoughtful questions about financing. Corbin deflected with practiced ease, pivoting to square footage and design concepts, to anything that looked like success rather than what funded it. "And the financing for the 4th location?" Glenn asked, his tone casual but his attention sharp. "Do you have that secured?" "All handled," Corbin said smoothly. "I've got everything I need." The word handled sat between us like a secret only I could decode. I'd signed the personal guarantee for $620,000 3 years ago when Corbin needed backing for his first real venue. The bank wouldn't approve the loan on his credit alone. He'd been carrying debt I didn't know about then. I was the stable one with clean credit and consistent income from the financial advisory practice. I ran from a center city office most of my family had never visited. The guarantee was supposed to be temporary. 2 years maximum, he'd said. 3 years later, I was still carrying the full liability. The loan had grown to $647,000 with expansion costs. I'd renewed twice without question, because that's what family did. That's what the reliable child did. While the celebrated one built his empire on foundations he never had to acknowledge. I've always said, my father declared, success is something you can point to. Corbin's built that. Albert Hewitt believed in tangible achievement. Restaurants you could walk into, reviews you could frame. My work managing retirement portfolios, restructuring small business finances, the quiet architecture of other people's security didn't photograph well. Phyllis spoke quietly from her end of the table. Elodie manages her own practice. She's been quite successful. The words landed and disappeared like stones in deep water. The conversation had already moved on. Saskia was asking about wedding venue options. Marlene was mentioning a contact at the Brandywine estate. My brother was describing his vision for the reception, with the same enthusiasm he brought to his business plans, large, visible, impossible to miss. I should have known then what was coming. The signs were everywhere. The way Corbin kept glancing at Glenn, measuring his performance. The way he steered every topic back to his achievements, his vision, his upcoming expansion. The way my father leaned forward, hungry for every detail of his son's success, while my mother watched me with that careful, knowing expression I'd learned to read as concern she'd never voice aloud. The first course arrived, seared scallops on something delicate and expensive. The server poured water into crystal glasses with the practiced silence of someone who knew how to be invisible in rooms where people performed for each other. Corbin tapped his glass lightly. The sound cut through the conversation like a blade. "I'd like to say a few words before we eat," he announced, standing. Saskia looked up, surprised. "Oh, you prepared a toast? You didn't tell me." "Just something I've been thinking about," he said, that familiar confidence settling over him completely now. My father leaned forward, already proud of whatever his son was about to say. Glenn and Marlene turned their attention to Corbin with polite expectation. Saskia smiled, delighted. My mother's glance found me again, but I kept my face neutral. The mask I'd learned to wear at family gatherings, where my role was audience rather than participant. The room went silent, waiting. Corbin stood with his glass raised, and I watched the future. I thought I knew begin to rewrite itself in the space between his smile and whatever words were about to follow. The words came out of his mouth like he'd rehearsed them. "Here's to building a real career," Corbin said, his voice carrying across the private dining room, something my sister never did. "To making something people can see." The silence that followed had texture. I felt it press against my skin. My father raised his glass immediately, beaming. "Hear, hear! That's my son." The crystal rang out as Albert clinked his glass against Corbin's. The sound sharp and final across the table. Glenn and Marlene offered polite, uncomfortable laughter. Saskia's smile froze. My mother went completely still. Every eye at the table found me. I could feel them waiting for tears, for anger, for the scene that would make this dinner memorable for all the wrong reasons. I raised my glass slowly. "To what people can see," I said, my voice level. Yes, I drank. The wine tasted like nothing. How do you smile through a sentence designed to erase you in front of strangers who will become family? The answer. I'd learned over 34 years. You don't smile. You go somewhere else behind your eyes. You let your face arrange itself into whatever expression keeps the evening moving. You become very good at being present without actually being there. Marlene leaned towards me as servers placed the first course. What do you do in finance, dear? I advise clients on risk management, I said. Very quiet work. Risk management. Glenn's attention sharpened. That's valuable. It doesn't photograph well, I said. The words hung there. Saskia looked like she wanted to say something, but couldn't find the shape of it. My father had already turned back to Corbin, asking about the mainline venue's timeline. The conversation flowed around me like I was a stone in a stream. Under the table, my mother's hand found mine. Her grip was brief, firm, saying everything she wouldn't voice aloud. Then she let go and picked up her fork. Dinner continued with forced normalcy. Corbin described his expansion plans with the enthusiasm of someone who'd just been validated. My father asked questions that were really opportunities for his son to elaborate. The Delaney's navigated the conversation with skilled politeness. I ate scallops I couldn't taste and answered questions with pleasant vagueness that discouraged follow-up. By 9:30, I'd engineered my exit. Early meeting tomorrow, I said, gathering my bag. It was lovely meeting you all. Saskia stood quickly. It was lovely meeting you, Elodie. I hope we can have lunch soon. I wondered if she meant it. My mother walked me to the valet stand. The March air outside was cold enough to feel clean. Drive safe, sweetheart, she said. Call me tomorrow. I will. Elodie. She waited until I looked at her. You've built something real. You know that. I nodded because it was easier than speaking. The drive back to Center City passed in peculiar numbness. Traffic lights cycled. Other cars moved with their own destinations, their own families who maybe saw them or maybe didn't. The city lights blurred. I told myself it was just the rain on the windshield. My apartment was dark and quiet. I dropped my bag on the counter, kicked off my heels, and stood for a moment in the familiar space that had never needed to impress anyone. I opened my laptop intending to review files for tomorrow's meeting. Instead, my fingers found their way to the folder I kept password-protected 3 directories deep. Corbin's loan guarantee. The file opened. Familiar because I'd looked at it dozens of times over 3 years. Looked at it and closed it and told myself it was temporary, that he'd refinance soon, that the guarantee was just a formality. The original agreement was dated March 2021. Business startup loan. Principal, Corbin J. Hewitt. Guarantor, Elodie M. Hewitt. Amount, $620,000. I scrolled to the email that had arrived that morning. I'd seen the notification during the drive to the Union League and marked it to review later. Subject line, renewal required, business loan guarantee, or 47829 W. The body was brief, professional. The kind of language banks use when they need you to make a decision they're not allowed to make for you. Please confirm intention to extend guarantee by April 15, 2024. Failure to respond by deadline will result in guarantee expiration and immediate review of loan terms. 21 days. 3 weeks to decide whether to keep holding up a man who just pushed me down. I stared at the screen. The cursor blinked next to the renewal confirmation button. Patient and indifferent. $620,000. 3 years of silent support for a brother who thought I'd never built anything real. 3 years of being the stable one with clean credit and consistent income. The one who signed her name to his dream, because that's what family did. The one who made it all possible while remaining completely invisible. I could click the button, confirm the extension, carry the liability for another 3 years while Corbin expanded into his fourth location, celebrated his visible success, told stories about his self-made empire at dinners where I didn't exist. Or I could let the deadline pass, 21 days to answer a question I hadn't known I was asking. What did I owe someone who couldn't see me? The answer had been forming long before tonight's toast. The date on the original loan agreement pulled me back 3 years to a March afternoon, when my brother's dream still felt like something I could protect. March 2021. I remember everything about that day. The bank office had smelled like new carpet, and the kind of optimism that comes with signature loans. Corbin had arrived early, spread his business plan across Patricia Harrison's desk with the careful pride of someone showing a newborn. Patricia, the bank's commercial loan officer, reviewed the application with the practiced neutrality of someone who'd seen 1,000 ambitious startup dreams. "This is it, Elodie," Corbin had said, his voice vibrating with barely contained energy. My chance to build something real. I'd sat in the chair beside him, watching him describe his vision for an upscale event venue that would transform Philadelphia's wedding and corporate event landscape. The numbers were aggressive. The market analysis was thorough. The passion was undeniable. Patricia had listened, made notes, asked questions that sounded conversational but weren't. "Tell me about the financing," I'd said quietly, because I'd learned to read the careful pauses in loan discussions. Patricia folded her hands on top of the business plan. "For a loan this size to a startup with no operating history, we require a guarantor with demonstrated assets and established credit." The silence that followed lasted maybe 3 seconds. In my memory, it stretched longer. Corbin's excitement deflated like something physical leaving his body. I didn't realize. Maybe I should look at smaller." "I'll guarantee it," I said. The words came out before he could finish the sentence. Before he could talk himself into something smaller, safer, less than what he'd envisioned. Before the dream could shrink to fit the constraints. Corbin turned to look at me. "You don't have to. I know. The amount is 620,000. I saw it in the application." I wondered now why I'd ever thought making myself invisible would protect him instead of erasing me. The question I'd never asked myself then hung in the memory now, sharp and uncomfortable. But in that March office 3 years ago, I'd only felt certainty. This was what sisters did. This was what family meant. This was how you helped someone you loved reach for something just beyond their grasp. Patricia pulled up the guarantor requirements on her computer. "You understand this creates full personal liability for the loan amount if the business defaults. Yes, your assets and credit would be accessible to satisfy the debt." "I understand." Corbin shifted in his chair, uncomfortable. "You don't need to be listed anywhere. I'm doing this myself, building it from nothing." I'd smiled at him then, gentle and reassuring. "The venue is yours. This is just a signature. But the business plan is brilliant, Corbin. The concept is all you. I'm just helping with the paperwork side." I remember thinking, this is what love looks like. Stepping back so someone else can shine. Patricia printed the guarantor documents, page after page of legal language that boiled down to a simple promise. If my brother couldn't pay, I would. I signed each page carefully, my professional signature that I used on client contracts and tax documents, making it official. Corbin watched me sign, his expression complicated. Pride mixed with something that might have been guilt, or might have been the first seeds of the narrative he'd tell himself later. "Dad's going to be so proud when he sees what I built," he said. "What I built. Not what we built. Not what you helped me build." I'd noticed the pronoun shift even then, but I'd told myself it didn't matter. The point was his success, not the credit. Patricia collected the signed documents, entered notes into her system. Corbin stood, already mentally moving to the next phase build-out. Permits, contractor negotiations. He shook Patricia's hand, then mine. "Thank you," he said. "This means everything." "Go build something amazing," I'd told him. He left with the energy of someone whose dream had just become possible, already pulling out his phone to call contractors. I stayed behind, gathering my bags slowly. "Ms. Hewitt?" Patricia looked up from her computer. "Was there something else? Can this arrangement stay between us? I don't want the family to know." Patricia's expression didn't change, but I saw her pause before responding. "All guarantor information is confidential unless you authorize disclosure." "Good." I adjusted my bag on my shoulder. He should get to feel like he did this alone. Even then, I was choosing to be unseen. 3 years. I'd been holding him up so quietly he'd forgotten I had hands. The memory dissolved. I was back in my apartment, the laptop screen casting blue light across my desk. The flashback faded, but the weight of it remained, settling over my shoulders like something I'd been carrying so long I'd stopped noticing until I tried to set it down. He should get to feel like he did this alone, and he did. So completely that he forgot I was ever there. So thoroughly that he could stand in front of future in-laws and current family and toast to building a real career, something his sister never did. So successfully that when he said he'd built it from nothing, he believed it. I'd given him the foundation and the invisibility. He'd taken both and constructed his self-made myth on my signature. The renewal notice glowed on the screen, patient and insistent. "Renewal decision required. 21 days remaining." The cursor blinked beside the confirmation button. I'd made myself invisible once to help him succeed. The question wasn't whether to renew it, was whether I could afford to stay invisible any longer. 3 days later, that question would become impossible to ignore. His name lit up my phone 3 days later, like nothing had happened. Like he hadn't just erased me in front of strangers, who would become his family. I was at my desk when Corbin's call came through. For a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail. Then muscle memory took over, and I picked up. "Elodie! Perfect timing!" His voice carried bright energy. "The architect just sent renderings for the mainline location. It's going to be incredible. Floor-to-ceiling windows, capacity for 300. The works." I set down my pen. "That's ambitious. How's the financing coming?" "All handled." The certainty in his voice was absolute. "I just need to know you'll support me like you always have." The phrase hung there, vague and loaded. Support like I always have. Words carrying weight he couldn't feel, because he'd never bothered to measure it. "What kind of support are you thinking?" "You know, just being there. Being proud of what I'm building." He shifted topics. "The contractor says we can break ground next week. June opening is completely realistic." I listened to him describe square footage and finishes. When he paused, I asked the question I knew would reveal everything. "How do you think the dinner went?" "Perfectly." His enthusiasm was genuine. Glenn and Marlene loved hearing about the business. Dad was so proud. I think it really set the right tone. "And your toast?" "Yeah, that came out great, right? Really set the tone." Glenn pulled me aside after to ask about expansion financing. I thought the toast came out great. My erasure had been so complete, he'd experienced it as success. The realization settled with cold clarity. He wasn't minimizing the insult. He genuinely didn't remember it as problematic, because he'd never considered my feelings at all. The toast had established his self-made narrative before the Delaney's. That I'd been collateral damage hadn't registered because I'd never been part of his calculation. "I'm glad it went well for you," I said. "For all of us." He sounded puzzled. "Listen, I've got to run meeting with the flooring supplier, but I wanted to share the good news. This is really happening. Everything I've been working toward." "Yes, I know." After the call ended, I sat in the quiet of my office, looking at the calendar alert. Loan guarantee renewal deadline, 18 days. An unread email blinked. Subject, monthly statement. Business loan, 47829 HW. I opened it mechanically. Loan payment history. Construction draws against the line of credit. Standard monthly reporting. "Support me like you always have," I said to the empty office. He doesn't even know what that means. 4 days later, the family group chat erupted with notifications. Corbin had posted to social media professional photos of the mainline construction site. Golden hour lighting making raw lumber look noble. The caption was carefully crafted. When they said it couldn't be done, I proved them wrong. Built from 2 empty hands and a dream. Second location opening June 2024. Self-made. Entrepreneur. Building. Nempire. Glenn Delaney commented, "Proud to see such determination. Looking forward to the opening." Saskia added hearts and fire emojis. My father shared it. This is what real success looks like. My son, the entrepreneur. Every like, every share, every proud comment was another brick in a monument, built on a foundation no one could see. Phyllis had reacted with a simple thumbs up. No commentary. I wondered what she thought when she read 2 empty hands. That evening, I opened the bank portal from my apartment. I'd been checking it periodically since the dinner, confirming the renewal deadline, reviewing the terms. But something made me click through to the detailed balance this time. The number stopped me cold. Current principal balance, 647, 328. I stared at the screen, recalculating, certain I'd misread. The original loan had been $620,000. I'd signed for that amount. I'd carried that number in my head for 3 years. When did it become that much? I said aloud. I scrolled to the transaction history. There it was, dated 2 weeks ago. Recent construction draw, 27,328, due, authorized by principal borrower. He'd drawn additional funds against the line of credit, against the guarantee I'd signed. He had that right. The loan agreement gave him access for expansion costs. But seeing it there, seeing how the number had grown without my knowledge, made something shift in my chest. How do you tell someone they've been spending your money when they don't even know you gave it? $647,000. 2 empty hands. I scrolled back to his post, to those words that would have been funny if they weren't funding his second location. The comments had grown friends congratulating him, industry contacts praising his entrepreneurial spirit, strangers inspired by his self-made journey. 15 days left to decide whether those empty hands deserved to stay that way. My phone rang. Mom. Her timing had always been uncanny, the way she called exactly when I needed her, or exactly when I hoped she wouldn't. I let it ring twice before answering. already knowing this conversation would be different from the others we'd had over the past week of careful check-ins and surface-level questions. Before I could decide anything, my mother was calling with a question I should have seen coming. My mother's kitchen smelled like Earl Grey, and the kind of patience that comes from raising children who never tell you everything. She'd called asking me to help reorganize photo albums, which we both knew was code for a conversation she didn't want over the phone. I'd driven to Germantown that Saturday afternoon, with the loan balance still burning in my mind, $647,000 and 15 days to decide. The albums are in the living room, Phyllis said, pouring tea into cups that had been in the family longer than I'd been alive. But sit first. Tell me how you've been. I sat at the kitchen table where I'd done homework and learned to lie by omission. Busy, the usual. How was the dinner? With the Delaney's. Her tone was careful, observational, not accusatory. It was fine. They seemed nice. And Corbin's toast? I looked at her then. Really looked. She was watching me with the same expression she'd worn when I was 16, and came home past curfew with a story that was technically true, but missing all the important parts. It was very Corbin, I said. She nodded slowly. I heard about your promotion. The healthcare systems consulting project. That's quite an accomplishment. I went still. I didn't mention that to you. No, you didn't. Her smile was gentle. Janet Fisher's daughter works in hospital administration. She mentioned they'd brought in an outside consultant for a major restructuring. When she described the project, I recognized your work. Janet Fisher. My mother's book club friend. A connection I'd never considered. She'd been watching me more closely than I realized. While the family spotlight stayed on Corbin's visible empire, my mother had been quietly tracking my invisible achievements through networks I'd never thought to map. I've always paid attention, Phyllis said. I've always known you're the one who doesn't need anyone to see. The words landed soft but sharp. Is that strength or neglect? The question came out before I could stop it. She set down her cup carefully. Sometimes both. Sometimes neither. Sometimes just the role you were born into. And Corbin's role is to be celebrated. Corbin's role is to be visible. She said it matter-of-factly. Your father needs that. Needs to see success in a way he can point to. And what do you need? To know my children are building lives they can sustain. She stood. Come, let's look at those albums. We moved to the living room where 3 leather-bound albums sat on the coffee table. Phyllis opened the first one, pages crackling with age. Photos from the 80s and 90s, family vacations, and school events. She turned pages slowly, then stopped at a photo I'd forgotten existed. I was 17, sitting at this same kitchen table with Corbin, who was 9. Papers spread between us college application materials. I was helping him draft his essay for a private school scholarship. In the photo, I was pointing at something on the page. He was looking up at me with complete trust. You've always helped him, Phyllis said quietly. Mother's eyes held something I couldn't quite read. Deeper knowledge she was choosing not to voice. Then she turned the page, the moment passing like she'd decided the timing wasn't right. What do you know about Corbin's finances? I asked. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she closed the album gently. Some people take, she said, while others give until there's nothing left. Mom, patterns repeat, sweetheart. What you did when you were 17. What you do now, it's the same kindness wearing different clothes. You know about the guarantee. It wasn't a question. The certainty in her expression confirmed it. She'd been watching both of us. She knew. I know many things, Phyllis said carefully. The question isn't what I know. It's what you're going to do with what you know. She picked up the second album. older photos from when we were children, baby pictures, and early birthdays. Before the patterns had set, "Why didn't you ever say anything?" My voice came out quieter than I intended, because some truths a person has to discover for themselves. She looked at me with eyes that had been watching, calculating, waiting. Some decisions only mean something if you make them on your own. She closed the album with a soft sound, definitive. "When the time is right," Phyllis said, "I'll tell you what I know about March 2021. The words hung in the air like a promise and a threat. March 2021. The month I'd signed the guarantee. The month I'd chosen to be invisible. What do you know about March 2021? The timing matters, Elodie. Right now, you need to make your own choice without my influence." She stood, gathering the albums. "But when you've decided, I'll tell you what I've been holding." I drove home with more questions than I'd arrived with. And a date. March 2021, burning in my mind like a match waiting to catch. My mother knew something. Something specific. Something she'd been keeping for 3 years, waiting for the right moment to strike. 15 days until the renewal deadline. And somewhere in the space between my mother's careful silence and my brother's oblivious confidence, I needed to figure out what I owed to people who'd never bothered to see me at all. The email notification had been sitting in my inbox for 3 days, unopened, like a bill I already knew I couldn't pay. I stood in my apartment kitchen Monday evening, laptop open beside a mug of cold tea. The notification glowed at the top of my screen. Guarantee renewal required. Action needed by April 15th. I'd done the dishes twice, reorganized the pantry, scrolled through my phone with committed distraction. Anything to avoid clicking that email, to postpone the moment when avoidance would have to become a decision. But I could feel it there, waiting. Patient in the way deadlines are patient. They don't need to hurry because time moves toward them regardless. 3 days. Not 3 hours. Not overnight. 3 days of walking past this screen and pretending I hadn't seen it. This wasn't accidental oversight. This was choice. Active, deliberate choice. To not know officially what I already knew in every other way. And that scared me more than whatever the email actually said. The quiet realization that avoidance, held long enough, becomes a decision of its own. I clicked. The email opened with clinical formality. No pleasantries. No acknowledgement that the numbers represented actual lives. Dear Ms. Hewitt, this notice concerns the personal guarantee you provided for commercial loan 847-392B. The current guarantee term expires April 15, 2024. Please confirm your intention to extend the guarantee for an additional 3-year term. Failure to respond by the deadline will result in guarantee expiration and immediate review of loan terms with the primary borrower. Below the text was a PDF attachment. I opened it. Loan summary and renewal terms. Current principal balance, $647,328. The number sat on the screen like a debt I'd inherited rather than chosen. $647,000. It had grown from the original amount construction draws, expansion costs, the normal metabolism of a business, always reaching for the next thing. And I'd renewed this once before, in early 2024, without even pausing to question it. That realization hit harder than the dollar amount. This wasn't the first renewal. The original guarantee had been for 3 years. But somewhere in the blur of the past year, I'd already said yes to another term without thinking, without considering this was now a pattern rather than a favor. Renewal term, 3 years, April 15, 2024. April 15, 2027. Same terms, same liability, same invisible architecture, holding up my brother's visible empire. A memory surfaced. March 2021. Bank conference room. Corbin across from me with a business plan binder. Nervous energy making him talk too fast. I signed 8 pages while Patricia Harrison explained terms. 2 years tops, Ellie, he'd said when we left. The restaurant will be profitable by then. This is just to get started. 2 years tops. That was 3 years ago. This wasn't the first renewal notice, it was the second. He'd already exceeded his promise once, and I'd let it slide without comment. Now here it was again, asking for another 3 years. I closed the laptop and stood in the quiet. The hesitation I felt wasn't new. That was the truth I'd been avoiding for 3 days, maybe longer. The discomfort didn't start at the Delaney dinner when his toast erased me. It didn't start when my father toasted to real success without including me. It didn't even start when I saw that social media post about 2 empty hands. It started the moment this email arrived Thursday morning. Maybe earlier. Maybe it had been there all along, buried under years of being the reliable one. The one who signed without asking questions. The one who made things possible and then disappeared from the story. The dinner hadn't changed my mind. It had simply armed me with justification for a choice I'd already made in silence. I'd been waiting for permission to say no. 3 days of avoidance. 3 years of automatic renewals. 34 years of being the child who didn't need attention. Who succeeded quietly, who held things together while someone else got to shine. Somewhere in those numbers was the moment I'd stopped choosing and started enduring. The dinner toast had been painful. Public humiliation in front of people who would become family. But if I was being honest, the hurt had resonated so deeply because it confirmed something I'd already known. I was invisible by design. My design. I'd made myself that way thinking it was generosity. Thinking it was love. Thinking the right thing to do was step back so someone else could step forward. But you can't build a life in someone else's shadow and call it success. You can't carry weight no one acknowledges and call it support. You can't disappear on purpose and then wonder why no one sees you. My phone lit up on the counter. Corbin. Hey, did you get a chance to handle that renewal thing yet? Bank keeps sending me reminders. Thanks for taking care of it, as always. I stared at the message, as always. Like it was a favor I'd done once, not a 3-year commitment renewed twice. Like it was taking care of paperwork, not guaranteeing nearly $750,000. Like my signature was a formality, instead of the foundation his entire operation rested on. 14 days until the deadline. I set the phone down without responding and looked back at the laptop, at the email still open, at the PDF with its clinical numbers and binding terms. The question wasn't whether to renew anymore. The question was whether I could afford to keep being invisible. Teresa Irvine's office had the hushed formality of a place where people came to make things official or to end them. Leather chairs and stacks of paper testifying to decisions made calmly. I'd called her Tuesday morning, the day after staring at Corbin's text, asking if I'd handled that renewal thing yet. A colleague had recommended Teresa, a commercial contracts attorney in downtown Philadelphia, with a reputation for clear-eyed assessment of messy situations. She sat across from me now, mid-40s, with reading glasses perched on her head. I'd explained the situation. Personal guarantee signed March 2021. First renewal early 2024. Second renewal due in 13 days. I signed a personal guarantee 3 years ago, I said. The bank wants me to renew. Can I just not? Teresa looked up from the documents I'd brought. You're asking if you have a legal obligation to extend? Yes, you don't. Her answer was immediate. The original guarantee remains valid through its current term, but renewal is entirely voluntary. Declining to renew isn't default. It's simply choosing not to enter a new agreement. The relief that washed over me was complicated by something heavier. Legal and right aren't always the same thing, so I can just not sign, I said slowly. Correct. When the renewal deadline passes without your signature, the guarantee expires per its original terms. The bank will then review the loan with your brother based on his credit and business performance alone. And if they decide it's too risky without a guarantor, that's between the bank and the borrower. You're not responsible for securing his financing beyond the commitment you already made and fulfilled. I'd come here expecting complication. Instead, she'd given me clarity. I didn't owe this. I never had. The harder question, Teresa said, is whether you plan to notify your brother in advance. I looked at her. Do I have to? Legally? No, but will you? The question sat there between us. If I call him, I said slowly, it becomes a conversation. It likely does. A negotiation. Another chance for him to make it about his needs, his business, his plans. I heard my voice harden. Another opportunity for me to be the reliable one who solves his problems. Teresa's expression didn't change, but I saw understanding in her eyes, the kind that comes from watching silence become its own kind of answer, more times than she could count. The bank will contact him, I said. When the deadline passes and I haven't renewed, they'll notify him per their standard protocol. That's their job, not mine. That's correct. Then that's what I'll do. Nothing. Let the bank follow their process. Teresa made a note. I'd recommend documenting your decision timeline. Keep records of when you received renewal notices, when you consulted me. Not because you'll need it legally, but because family situations can become complicated. My mother already knows something's wrong. Then documentation protects you from accusations of impulsiveness. You're making an informed decision after legal consultation. I nodded. I won't call him. The bank will notify him when I don't renew. That's your right. I left her office feeling simultaneously lighter and heavier. Lighter because I had clarity. Heavier because knowing I could say no meant actually having to do it or choosing not to, and living with that weight forever. The drive home took me through Center City rush hour. At a red light on Market Street, I checked my phone. A notification glowed at the top. Corbin's restaurant page. A new post. I tapped it. The image was professional, the mainline venue mid-construction. Evening light making the raw space look noble. The caption was Classic Corbin, Grand Opening Weekend. April 12, 14. 3 years, 3 locations. Celebrate this milestone with us. Tickets available now for our launch weekend gala. Entrepreneur, #milestone, #building, Nempire. I read it again. April 12th, 14. The guarantee deadline was April 15. I was planning a grand opening celebration. Champagne and ribbon cutting and speeches for the same weekend his funding could collapse. The same 72 hours that would determine whether the bank would continue the loan without my backing. He'd celebrate while the clock ran out, and he had no idea. The light turned green. Someone honked. I put the phone down and drove. He'd posted about the opening the same week he'd texted, asking if I'd handled that renewal thing yet. He knew the deadline was approaching. The bank had been sending him reminders, but in his mind, my renewal was a foregone conclusion. Something I'd take care of, as always. It hadn't occurred to him that I might say no. I pulled into my building's parking garage and sat in the quiet car. The grand opening announcement glowed on my phone. April 12th through 14. Champagne and ribbon cutting, and 3 years of success on display. The guarantee expired April 15. I was planning a celebration for the same week his entire operation could collapse, and he didn't know I'd already decided to let it. I put the phone down and sat in the darkness, listening to my car engine cool. 13 days. I waited for the guilt that surely should be coming. It never arrived. All I felt was calm. The kind of calm that comes after a long-delayed decision finally settles into certainty. Corbin's Instagram story opened with a slow pan across polished marble counters and Edison bulbs, his mainline venue. 10 days from its grand opening, I was home. Thursday evening, scrolling through my phone with the kind of morbid fascination that comes from watching someone walk confidently toward a cliff edge. He'd posted a dozen stories in the past hour, documenting every corner of the nearly complete restaurant with the pride of someone showing off a newborn. The captions were breathless, emphatic. 3 years, 3 locations. This is just the beginning. Each post felt like a countdown to something he couldn't see coming. The grand opening weekend. The guarantee deadline. The collision that would determine whether his empire stood or collapsed. I scrolled to the next story. Construction site. Hard hats. Permit documents being signed. 3rd location breaking ground. The caption read, "Momentum doesn't wait." I sat up straighter. The 3rd location wasn't just planned. It had already started. Permits pulled. Contractors working. Money committed, deposits paid, materials ordered, timelines established. He wasn't just talking about future expansion. He'd already locked himself into it. I was building a tower on sand that was already washing away. The next few stories showed progress photos, contractor meetings, architectural renderings. All of it required capital. All of it assumed the financing that had funded his first 2 locations would continue uninterrupted. All of it rested on my signature. Then a video loaded. Saskia appeared on screen, walking through the mainline venue with Corbin. Her hospitality marketing expertise showed in the way she framed questions, testing angles for promotion. But then she asked something that made me freeze. "Okay, but seriously," she said, her tone half joking but genuinely curious. "Where's the money coming from? This is your 3rd place in 3 years." Corbin laughed, that easy confidence I'd heard my whole life. "Business strategy, Sask. You don't expand by standing still. It's all about momentum, financial planning, knowing when to bet on yourself. But like actual money where, trust me, I've got it handled." He redirected the camera to show off the bar area, effectively ending that line of questioning. I replayed the video. Saskia had asked the question I should have asked in 2021. The question anyone lending someone money should ask. The question that deserved an actual answer, instead of vague platitudes about momentum and strategy. I didn't answer her question. He never answers that question, because the answer was me. The answer had always been me, standing invisible in the background, making it all possible with a signature he'd learned to take for granted. How do you watch someone celebrate what's about to disappear? The question sat in my mind as I continued scrolling. More stories, more celebration, more oblivious confidence that everything would continue exactly as it had been. Building the future. One caption read, over a photo of Corbin pointing at a map with 4 location pins marked. Location 4 in the pipeline, 2026 expansion timeline set. 4 locations. A timeline extending 2 more years. Plans built on assumptions he'd never thought to verify because they'd always held true. I was about to close the app when the final story loaded. A photo. Corbin shaking hands with a woman in a business suit. A property manager, based on the branded folder she held. In the background, a champagne bottle and 2 glasses. The caption made my stomach drop. Official. Location 4 is happening. Lease signed, deposit down. Fall 2024, grand opening. When you know it's right, you commit. Entrepreneur, shut expansion, building an empire. I stared at the screen. He'd signed a lease. Today, apparently, based on the timestamp. Signed a lease and paid a deposit for a 4th location opening fall 2024. 10 days before the guarantee that funded his entire operation was set to expire. 10 days before the bank would review his loan without my backing and decide whether his credit and business performance alone could support the debt he'd accumulated. 10 days before everything could collapse, and he was signing new leases. 10 days left, and he'd just signed another lease. The lease signing photo showed Corbin shaking hands with the property manager, champagne glasses in frame, caption reading, Location 4 is official. 10 days until the guarantee expired. He'd just committed to a 4th restaurant built on financing that wouldn't exist by April 15th. I thought about calling him, texting, warning him that he needed to understand his actual financial position before making commitments like this. Then I remembered. He'd texted me days ago asking if I'd handled that renewal thing yet. As if my signature was a given. As if $750,000 in personal liability was just something I took care of. As always, I wasn't making these decisions in ignorance. He was making them in assumption. Assuming I'd renew. Assuming I'd always renew. Assuming the invisible foundation would stay invisible and reliable forever. I closed the app and sat in the quiet of my apartment. 3 locations operating. 3rd location under construction. 4th location lease signed. Grand opening celebration. Planned for the weekend before the deadline. All of it built on a guarantee that would expire in 10 days. All of it about to discover what happened when the invisible became visible through its absence. I picked up my phone and called my mother. She answered on the 2nd ring. Elodie, I was wondering when you'd call. Of course she was. She always knew. April 15th arrived like any other Monday. I woke at 6:30 to the sound of rain against my apartment windows. I made coffee in the French press my father had given me for Christmas 4 years ago, back when Corbin and I still exchanged gifts at the same table. I checked my email 2 newsletters, one spam message about mortgage refinancing that felt like a cosmic joke. I showered, dressed in the navy blazer I wore when I wanted to feel like I had my life together, and drove to the office building where I'd been working contract paralegal hours since January. The deadline wasn't at sunrise. It wasn't even during business hours. It was at 11:59 p.m., the moment my personal guarantee would expire. Unless I signed the renewal documents the bank had sent 3 weeks earlier. The ones that had been sitting in my kitchen drawer beneath a stack of takeout menus I never used. I had not signed them. I would not sign them. At 11:47 p.m., I sat on my couch with my phone face down on the cushion beside me and watched the clock on my microwave count forward. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the muffled television sounds from the unit next door. 11:50, 11:53, 11:58. When the numbers rolled over to midnight, I felt something I had not expected to feel. Relief, not guilt, not panic, not the crushing weight of familial betrayal. Just relief, the kind that comes when you finally stop carrying something that was never yours to carry in the first place. I exhaled. I turned off the lamp. I went to bed and slept through the night for the first time in months. The next 2 days were silent. Wednesday, April 16th. Thursday, April 17th. No calls, no texts, no frantic voicemails from Corbin or my mother or Saskia's parents demanding explanations. I went to work both days, processed discovery documents for a construction litigation case, ate turkey sandwiches at my desk, and came home to an apartment that felt, for the first time since March 2021, like it belonged only to me. I knew the silence wouldn't last. The bank would have sent Corbin a notification the moment the guarantee lapsed, probably a formal letter on bank letterhead, maybe a phone call from Patricia Harrison herself, explaining the change in loan status. He would have read it. He would have called the bank to confirm. And then he would have done the math and realized exactly what I had done. Have you ever waited for someone to realize what you've done, not with dread, but with the calm certainty of someone who has already made peace with the consequences? I didn't have to wait long. Corbin called at 2:14 p.m. on Thursday, April 17th. I was in my car, parked outside a Trader Joe's on a grocery run. I'd been putting off all week, holding a reusable shopping bag in one hand and my phone in the other. I stared at his name on the screen, Corbin Mobile, for 3 full rings before I answered. "Hello," I said. "What the hell did you do?" His voice was low, controlled, vibrating with the kind of anger that comes from someone who has spent the last 2 hours trying not to explode. "I didn't renew the guarantee," I said. "It expired on the 15th. You didn't." He stopped. I heard him breathing, heard him trying to collect himself. "Elodie, do you understand what you just did? Do you have any idea what this means?" "I do," I said. "It means I'm no longer personally liable for your business loan. It means the bank is going to call the entire loan," he said, his voice rising. "It means I have 30 days to pay back $647,000, or they seize everything I've built. It means you just sabotaged 3 years of my life because you couldn't handle the fact that I'm successful, and you're not." I sat very still. The grocery bag crinkled in my lap. Rain started to tap against the windshield. "That's not why I did it," I said. "Then why?" he demanded. "Why would you destroy me like this?" "I'm not destroying you, Corbin," I said. "I'm protecting myself. The guarantee was never supposed to be permanent. You told me it would be temporary. You told me you'd refinance within 6 months. That was 3 years ago. I was going to refinance," he said. "I was in the process. You signed a lease for a 4th location 10 days before the deadline," I said. "You posted about it on Instagram." Silence. "I have a legal right not to renew," I continued. "The bank gave me that option in writing. I took it. That's all this is." "You're lying," he said. "This isn't about legal rights. This is about you being jealous. This is about you punishing me because I took a risk, and it paid off, and you're still stuck doing paralegal grunt work in someone else's office." I closed my eyes. The rain was getting louder. Believe what you want, I said. Here's what's going to happen, Corbin said, his voice sharpening into something cold and deliberate. You're going to call the bank tomorrow morning and tell them you made a mistake. You're going to reinstate the guarantee, and you're going to do it before Monday. Or I swear to God, Elodie, I will tell Mom and Dad and Saskia's parents exactly what you did and why you did it. I will make sure every single person in this family knows you sabotaged me out of spite. And if I don't? I asked quietly. Then you're going to find out what it feels like to be the villain, he said. I hung up without answering. When Saskia Delaney called Friday morning asking to meet for coffee, I knew Corbin had left something out. I'd spent the night after his ultimatum, replaying the conversation, his threats, his anger, his certainty that I was the villain in a story only he was allowed to narrate. But Saskia's voice on the phone wasn't angry. It was careful, confused. She wanted to talk, she said, about what was really happening with the loan guarantee. Not Corbin's version. Mine. We met at a coffee shop in Center City at 11, a narrow place with exposed brick walls and the smell of dark roast hanging in the air, like a question nobody wanted to ask. Saskia was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table with 2 ceramic mugs in front of her, one black coffee, one something pale and milky that I assumed was mine. She looked tired. Her engagement ring caught the light as she wrapped both hands around her cup. Thank you for coming, she said. I sat down. What did Corbin tell you? She exhaled slowly. He won't tell me what's going on, just that you're refusing to help him. But I know there's more to it. He's been acting strange all week on the phone with banks, locking himself in the office, barely sleeping. Yesterday, I found him sitting in his car outside the gym, staring at his phone like it had just delivered bad news. What has he told you about the guarantee? I asked. She hesitated. Just that you signed something years ago and now you're backing out. He made it sound like you were being petty, like you were punishing him for something. Cosigner? I said quietly. What? Is that the word he used? Cosigner? Saskia frowned. Yes. He said you co-signed a business loan and now you've changed your mind. I took a sip of the coffee. It was a latte, too sweet, but I drank it anyway. I've been the sole personal guarantor for $647,000 since March 2021. Not a cosigner. Sole guarantor. If the loan defaults, I lose everything I own. Corbin loses the business. I lose my apartment, my savings, my future. Saskia went very still. 600. She set her cup down carefully, like she was afraid it might shatter. He said it was a small business loan you co-signed, not sole guarantor, not that amount. He'd rewritten my sacrifice as my signature. He told me it would be temporary, I said. 6 months, maybe a year, until he could refinance on his own credit. That was 3 years ago. He's renewed the loan twice since then. I've been carrying that liability for 3 years while he opened new locations and signed leases and posted about his success on Instagram. Saskia's face had gone pale. He never told me any of that. I know, I said. She stared at her coffee for a long moment. Then she said, he spent the last 2 days calling banks. I heard him on the phone, replacement guarantee, bridge financing, refinancing applications, anything. They all said no. Something about his credit and his debt-to-income ratio being too high. He can't get another guarantor, I said. Not one that the bank will accept. No, Saskia said. He can't. I watched her process the information. Watched her rearrange the story Corbin had been telling into something closer to the truth. Outside, A delivery truck rumbled past. The espresso machine hissed behind the counter. He came to dinner at my parents' house last night, Saskia said finally. Thursday. He asked my mom and dad for money, called it temporary support to help him complete the expansion. He made it sound like an opportunity, not an emergency. My stomach tightened. What did they say? My dad went quiet, she said. You know that look people get when they're deciding whether to call someone out? My father, Glenn, he's a retired business executive, spent 40 years in corporate finance. He has this neutral face he puts on when someone's lying to him. He got that face the second Corbin started talking. How many versions of this story was he telling? Did your father ask questions? I said. One, Saskia said. He asked Corbin point blank, what's your current loan status and existing debt obligations? Corbin fumbled the answer. Said something vague about standard business financing and manageable terms. My dad didn't push, but he looked at my mom, Marlene, and I saw that look. The one that means they're going to talk about it later when I'm not in the room. Your father doesn't believe him, I said. My father doesn't ask questions he doesn't already know the answer to, Saskia said. He's researching, isn't he? Corbin's finances, the loan, all of it. Probably, I said. She pulled her phone from her purse and opened it, tapped a few times, then turned the screen toward me. It was a business filing database, public records, corporate registrations, UCC filings, Corbin's business name, the loan origination date, the amount, my name listed as personal guarantor. I looked this up this morning, Saskia said. After the dinner, after the way he answered my dad's question, I wanted to see for myself. I stared at the screen. There it was. March 2021, $620,000. Elodie M. Hewitt, guarantor. He lied to me about all of it, Saskia said quietly. The amount, the terms, your role. He made it sound like you were being unreasonable, when the truth is, you've been holding up his entire empire for 3 years. The truth was public record. He'd just been counting on no one looking. What else has he hidden? Saskia asked. I didn't answer right away. I didn't know where to start. I didn't answer her question. Friday afternoon. I told Saskia I needed time to think, paid for both coffees, and walked back to my apartment, feeling like the walls between truth and loyalty were crumbling faster than I could rebuild them. Saskia texted Sunday afternoon. Dad wants to meet with Corbin tomorrow, bringing an accountant. I stared at the message for a full minute before I replied. Did Corbin agree? He doesn't know he has a choice, she wrote back. Dad framed it as the only path forward. Monday morning, Saskia asked if I'd meet her again before the meeting. Same coffee shop, same corner table. But this time, she looked like someone bracing for impact. Her hands shook slightly as she stirred sugar into her coffee, 2 packets, then a third, like she needed something to do that wasn't talking. My dad scheduled a formal meeting for this afternoon, she said. He's bringing someone, a financial analyst or accountant, I'm not sure which. He told Corbin it's standard due diligence for any potential investment. What did Corbin say? I asked. He seemed relieved, Saskia said. Like he thought the hard part was over. Like all he had to do was show Dad the numbers and everything would be fine. She set her spoon down carefully, aligning it parallel to the edge of the saucer. My dad told me something Saturday night, she continued. After I showed him the public records, after he saw the loan amount and your name. He said Corbin's answers Friday matched a pattern he's seen before. Entrepreneurs hiding debt always deflect the same way. vague language, optimistic projections, expansion plans without clear capital sources. Experience recognizes its own patterns. He doesn't just want standard due diligence, I said quietly. He suspects something specific. He suspects Corbin is hiding significant debt, Saskia said. Not just the guarantee issue, additional debt. He didn't say how much or what kind, but he's seen this pattern fail too many times to ignore it. I felt something shift in my chest. Not relief, exactly, but validation. Glenn Delaney had spent 40 years in corporate finance. He knew what financial deception looked like, and he'd recognized it in Corbin after one dinner conversation. What happens if the audit finds something? Saskia asked. Then your father walks away, I said. And Corbin has 30 days to pay back the loan or lose everything. She closed her eyes. The meeting started at 2 o'clock. I spent the afternoon at my apartment, trying to work on a contract review assignment and failing to concentrate on anything except my phone. Saskia texted updates every 15 minutes, like dispatches from a battlefield I couldn't see. 2:14 p.m. They're here. Dad brought someone. Looks professional. Corbin's wearing the blue suit. 2:31 p.m. Dad just made the offer. He'll help, but only after full financial audit. Corbin looks relieved. 2:49 p.m. The accountant Wayne Gallagher just laid out audit terms, business and personal finances, everything. I read that message 3 times. Wayne Gallagher. Forensic accountant, probably, given Glenn's thoroughness. The kind who traced money through shell companies and found debts people thought they'd buried. 3:02 p.m. Corbin agreed, didn't even hesitate. Did he really think a forensic audit wouldn't find everything? 3:08 p.m. Wayne explained the scope bank statements, tax returns, credit reports, loan documents, business accounts. Complete transparency required. 3:35 p.m. Corbin seems confident, actually confident. He told Dad the audit will prove the business is sound. Does he not know what they'll find? I typed back. He's convinced himself the numbers will work out. They always have before. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. How can he not see it? Saskia wrote. Because he doesn't want to, I replied. Mid CTA. Before I tell you what happened in that meeting, are you still here? Comment. A, if the accountant will find hidden debt, or B, if Corbin's been honest. This is where everything turns. Please note, the next part includes fictionalized details for narrative purposes. If you'd rather not continue, feel free to pause now. End mid-CTA, Namshwa, 4:01 p.m. He just signed authorization forms, uploading documents to Wayne's secure portal now. 4:23 p.m. Bank statements going up, business accounts, tax returns, loan statements, everything Wayne needs. I watched my phone like it was counting down to detonation. 4:47 p.m. All submitted. Wayne says audit starts tomorrow. Results in 3 to 5 business days. 4:52 p.m. Corbin shook Dad's hand. Thanked him. He actually thinks this is going to work. I set my phone face down on the couch and stared at the ceiling. Corbin had just handed Wayne Gallagher everything he needed to trace the hidden $85,000 in personal debt credit cards, personal loans, the financial trail Corbin had been covering up since before he'd asked me to sign the guarantee. The numbers that would prove he'd been financially unstable from the start. Watching the trap close felt different than I'd expected. Not triumphant, just inevitable. My phone rang at 6:43. Not Saskia this time. My mother. I answered on the third ring. Elodie. she said. Her voice was steady, practiced, like she'd rehearsed this conversation in her head until the words lost their weight. I need to tell you about March 2021, about what I knew and didn't say. I sat very still. What do you mean? I asked. About the debt Corbin was carrying when he asked you to sign the guarantee, she said. The $85,000 in credit cards and personal loans he'd accumulated before the business loan. I knew about it, Elodie. I knew, and I never told you. The secret I didn't know existed was one my mother had kept. Why didn't you tell me? I asked. Because, my mother said, if I had, you would have hated me instead of questioning him. My mother's kitchen carried the quiet weight of secrets she'd been keeping in drawers I'd never thought to open. The Earl Grey steam curling up like it had nowhere urgent to be. I arrived Tuesday afternoon, the day after her confession. She'd asked me to come to her house in Germantown, the smaller row home she'd downsized to after the kids moved out. She had tea ready when I walked in. 2 cups, shortbread cookies, and a manila folder on the kitchen table that looked too organized to be anything but evidence. Thank you for coming, she said. I should have had this conversation 3 years ago. I wrapped my hands around the teacup, too hot to drink. You said you knew about the debt, I said. When did you find out? Phyllis slid the folder toward me and opened it. Inside were printouts, credit alerts, business filings, loan documents, all organized with sticky tabs and dates in her handwriting. The earliest page was marked February 2019. I've been watching his finances since 2019, she said. Not spying, monitoring. There's a difference. I stared at the folder. You've been tracking him for 5 years? I set up credit monitoring after you two moved out on your own, she said. Both of you. I wanted to make sure neither of you were struggling. You were fine. Corbin was different. I wondered how many mothers kept spreadsheets on their children's debts, quietly, for years, saying nothing. I flipped through the pages. March 2019. Credit card balance climbing. August 2019. Second card maxed. December 2020. Personal loan. And then, circled in red ink, March 2021. Total personal debt across 4 cards and 2 loans, $85,217. The month he'd asked me to guarantee the business loan. You knew, I said quietly. When he came to me in March 2021, you already knew he had this debt. Yes, and you let me sign anyway? She met my eyes without flinching. I thought you'd say no if you knew. I thought you should say no. But if I told you, I would become the villain, the interfering mother who didn't believe in her son. You would have resented me, not him. So I stayed silent and hoped you'd ask the right questions. I trusted him, I said. I didn't think I needed to ask. I know, she said. I watched you sign without doing due diligence. I watched you renew twice. I watched you carry his debt while he posted about expansion, like he'd built it all himself. I was learning, slowly, that silence could be its own kind of strategy, hers as much as mine. Phyllis turned more pages. July 2021. Another credit card opened. December 2022. Balance transfers. April 2023. Promotional financing for restaurant equipment charged to personal credit. She'd tracked it all. Every alert, every filing, even screenshots of Instagram posts showing new furniture, vacations, spending that didn't match someone claiming financial constraint. Why keep all this? I asked. Insurance, she said, in case you ever needed proof. 3 years of documentation. Organized, dated, annotated. A paper trail showing exactly what Corbin had been hiding and when. The audit, I said. Wayne Gallagher's audit. It's going to find all of this, isn't it? Within days, Phyllis said. Corbin gave them access to everything when he submitted those forms: personal credit history, bank statements, loan documents. Wayne will trace every debt, every card, every late payment. The accountant will build the same timeline I built, except his will have legal weight, and Saskia will see what he's been hiding from her too. Yes, Phyllis said. She will. I closed the folder and pushed it back. My tea had gone lukewarm. Outside, a neighbor's dog barked twice and went quiet. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. Why not 3 years ago? Phyllis folded her hands on the table. For the first time since I'd arrived, she looked tired. Because I kept this documentation for a reason, she said. Not to expose Corbin, to protect you if the guarantee had ever defaulted, if the bank had come after you for payment and seized your assets. This folder would have been your legal defense. Material omission. Fraud in the inducement. Corbin asked you to guarantee a loan while hiding $85,000 in undisclosed personal debt. You signed based on incomplete information. Any attorney could have argued you were defrauded. I went very still. You built me a defense, I said slowly. I built you an exit, she corrected. In case you ever needed one. I couldn't stop you from signing in 2021. But I could make sure you had proof what he'd hidden if it ever came to that. She'd been building my defense while I built his empire. The audit will expose him in days, Phyllis said quietly. Wayne will find the debt. Glenn will withdraw his support. Saskia will know the truth. You won't have to say a word. The numbers will speak for themselves. I looked at my mother across the kitchen table. This woman who'd watched me walk into a trap and documented every step so I could prove it was a trap if I ever needed to escape. Did you ever tell him you knew? I asked. No, my mother said. I never told him I knew. She handed me the folder to take home. I left her kitchen with 3 years of documentation in my bag and a question that would keep me awake all night. The question kept me awake Wednesday night. Did I owe my brother a warning about what the audit would find? I sat on my couch at 2 a.m. with my phone in my hand. Corbin's #1 tap away. 10 words would be enough. Audit will find your personal debt. Withdraw before it's too late. He'd have time to pull back, maybe claim a scheduling conflict, save himself from exposure before Wayne Gallagher traced the trail my mother had already mapped. 1 text. That's all it would take. But I couldn't write it. I set the phone face down on the cushion and stared at the ceiling, trying to untangle obligation from guilt, from something that felt uncomfortably close to revenge. He was my brother. We'd shared a childhood, a family, a last name that used to mean something. Before it became a liability, I carried on legal documents. Didn't that count for something? Didn't blood require at least a warning? Except he'd hidden $85,000 in debt when he'd asked me to sign the guarantee. He'd lied to Saskia about the scale and terms. He'd asked Glenn Delaney for money while deflecting questions about his existing obligations. He'd submitted financial documents to Wayne, knowing or choosing not to know what they'd reveal. Warning him now wouldn't be compassion. It would be complicity. Silence, I realized, wasn't betrayal. I'd spent 3 years protecting him from consequences he'd earned. 3 years renewing a guarantee I should have let expire. 3 years carrying weight that was never mine while he expanded and celebrated and posted about his success, like he'd built it without standing on my credit score. Warning him would mean protecting him from the truth. One more time. It would mean becoming part of the deception instead of just a victim of it. He'd built this situation brick by brick, the debt, the deflection, the confident submission of documents to a forensic accountant hired specifically to find what people were hiding. I hadn't built any of it. Why should I dismantle the truth before it reached him? I picked up my phone again, opened a blank text, stared at the cursor blinking in the empty message field. Then I closed it. No warning, no interference. I wouldn't volunteer information to Wayne that he hadn't asked for, but I wouldn't lie if he contacted me. I wouldn't protect Corbin from natural consequences of choices he'd made alone. Drawing boundaries didn't require building weapons against him. It just meant refusing to be his shield anymore. I won't warn him, I thought. I won't lie for him. I'll just stop carrying what isn't mine. I turned off my phone. I'll just stop carrying what isn't mine. I turned off my phone and went to bed. There's a difference. I'd realized somewhere between midnight and dawn, between letting someone fall and pushing them. I wasn't attacking my brother by staying silent. I wasn't sabotaging him out of jealousy or spite or any of the motives he'd accused me of during that phone call a week ago. I was simply not protecting him from gravity anymore. Truth wasn't a weapon I was wielding. It was just truth. And I'd been holding up the sky for so long that I'd forgotten what it looked like to watch it find its own level. Thursday passed. Then Friday. Work, routine, the ordinary rhythm of contract paralegal hours and grocery runs and evening walks around my neighborhood. No calls from Corbin. No texts from Saskia with updates. Just the quiet knowledge that somewhere in the background, Wayne Gallagher was working through bank statements and credit reports and the timeline of debt Corbin had thought he'd hidden well enough. Friday afternoon at 3:20, my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered on the second ring. "This is Elodie Hewitt," I said. "Ms. Hewitt, this is Wayne Gallagher. I'm calling to verify some details regarding the business loan guarantee for your brother's restaurant ventures." His voice was professional, neutral, the kind of tone that gave nothing away. "Of course," I said. "You signed as sole personal guarantor in March 2021 for a loan amount of $620,000. Is that correct?" "Correct. And you declined to renew the guarantee extension this month when it came up for renewal?" "Yes," I said. I received renewal documents from the bank and chose not to sign them. The guarantee expired April 15th. "Understood," Wayne said. I heard the faint sound of typing. "And your relationship to the borrower, Corbin Hewitt, is sibling? No business partnership or co-ownership?" "Sibling only," I said. "I have no ownership stake in the restaurants. I was never involved in business operations." "Thank you," he said. "That clarifies the structure." There was a pause. More typing. "I'm reviewing other financial aspects as well," Wayne continued, "building a comprehensive picture for Mr. Delaney's investment decision. Personal credit history, debt obligations, spending patterns relative to reported income." My pulse quickened, but I kept my voice steady. "I understand. If I have follow-up questions about the timeline or your decision not to renew, may I contact you again?" "Yes," I said. "You can reach me at this number. Thank you for your time, Ms. Hewitt." Hung up. I set my phone down on my desk and exhaled slowly. Wayne's tone had been neutral, professional, but his mention of other financial aspects meant he'd already found something worth investigating deeper. Personal credit history. Debt obligations. The language was careful, but the meaning was clear. The mechanism was already in motion. The audit wasn't just verifying the guarantee. It was mapping everything Corbin had hidden: the debt, the spending, the timeline of deception that stretched back years. And I'd done nothing but answer truthfully when asked. 3 days later, the mechanism Wayne had set in motion began producing results. The family chat notification arrived Monday morning. Update on mainline grand opening timeline adjustment necessary. I was drinking coffee at my kitchen counter when my phone lit up with Corbin's message. I opened the family group chat. Me, Corbin, our mother Phyllis, our father Albert, and read the announcement he'd posted at 7:43 a.m. Mainline grand opening postponed to ensure quality standards, Corbin had written. Timeline adjustment due to minor build-out delays. New date TBD. Appreciate everyone's patience as we get this right. Corporate language. Vague reassurances. No mention of the guarantee that had expired 2 weeks ago. No reference to financial constraints or missing capital. Just timeline adjustment and quality standards. Words that meant nothing while sounding like they meant something. I set my coffee down and waited. My father responded 6 minutes later. What kind of delays? Albert wrote. Is this a funding issue? You said everything was on track last week. I stared at the screen. My father, Albert Hewitt, 68, who'd spent 3 years telling anyone who'd listen about his son's restaurant empire, who'd framed newspaper clippings about the second location's opening, who'd never once questioned Corbin's business decisions, was asking if there was a problem. Even my father was asking questions now. Corbin's reply came fast. Just standard construction timeline stuff, Dad. Nothing to worry about. Albert typed back immediately. 3 years, 3 locations, and suddenly standard delays? Talk to me, son. The chat went quiet. I watched the 3 dots appear and disappear under Corbin's name, typing, deleting, typing again. My mother hadn't responded at all. Her silence in the group chat felt louder than the questions my father was asking. Finally, Corbin's message appeared. Let's talk later, Dad. Lots of moving pieces right now. Trust me, it's handled. But my father didn't respond with reassurance this time. He didn't send back the encouraging words or the proud father emoji he'd used for years. He just went silent. And in that silence, I could feel something shifting, the unquestioning pride that had held Corbin up beginning to crack into doubt, into the uncomfortable recognition that maybe his son's success story had chapters he'd never read. I closed the chat and finished my coffee. Hours later, at 2:14 in the afternoon, Saskia texted me privately. Wayne finished. Meeting with my dad in an hour. Dad's face when he read the summary. This is bad, isn't it? I stared at the message for a long moment before I typed back. The audit will show what's real, I wrote. That's all any of us need. 3 dots. Then, I'm scared of what's real. The audit was a mirror he'd held up himself. I didn't hear from Saskia again until 7:30 that evening. This time, she called. $85,000, she said the moment I answered. Her voice was steady but tight, like she was holding something fragile and trying not to drop it. Personal credit cards, 4 different accounts. Wayne found it all because Corbin gave him complete access to everything. I sat down on my couch. When did he take on the debt? That's the part that makes it worse, Saskia said. Wayne traced the dates. The debt predates the original business loan by 6 months. He had this before the guarantee, before he asked you to sign anything. He was already $85,000 in the hole when he told you the business loan was the only financing he needed. I closed my eyes. He lied to everyone, Saskia continued. To you when he asked for the guarantee. To me when we got engaged. To my parents when he asked for money last month. Wayne said the spending patterns show consistent personal use restaurants, travel, furniture. Not business expenses, personal debt he was hiding. What did your father say? He didn't say much, Saskia said. He just listened to Wayne's presentation and then asked how much of what Corbin told him was true. Wayne couldn't answer that. He can only report what the numbers show. I heard her take a breath. The irony is what kills me, she said. Corbin submitted everything to prove he was financially sound, complete transparency, he called it. Gave Wayne access to bank statements, credit reports, tax returns, everything he needed to verify that the business was worth investing in. And that transparency is exactly what exposed all of it. Wayne traced the spending, cross-referenced the dates, found the debt Corbin thought was separate enough to stay hidden. He gave Wayne the map to his own deception. I said quietly. Yes, Saskia said. His bid for help revealed exactly why he needed it. Outside my window, the streetlights were coming on. Monday evening in late April, the air finally starting to warm after a long winter. Somewhere across the city, Glenn Delaney was reading an audit report that documented 3 years of lies my brother had told, built on a foundation of debt he'd been carrying since before those lies began. My dad scheduled a meeting for tomorrow morning, Saskia said. 10 a.m. He wants Corbin there with Wayne to go through the findings line by line. He asked me how much I knew before this week. What did you tell him? The truth, she said. That I knew what Corbin told me, which apparently wasn't much. It never waited for convenient timing. That much I'd learned by now. The investment is off, I said. It wasn't a question. My father didn't say that explicitly, Saskia replied. But yes, it's off. She paused. Then, quietly, will you come to the meeting tomorrow? I told Saskia I'd think about it, and called her back an hour later to say yes. But before I could leave the voicemail, she called me first. Saskia called at 11 p.m. Voice shaking, she'd just left Corbin's apartment with more questions than answers. I went to his place, she said. I could hear traffic in the background, the sound of her car idling. I couldn't wait until tomorrow's meeting. I needed to hear him explain the $85,000. I needed to hear it from him before Wayne presented it in front of my father, like evidence in a trial. What did he say? I asked. He tried to explain, Saskia said, but I didn't let him start with excuses. I brought a copy of the audit report my dad gave me. I walked into his apartment and put it on his kitchen table. Wayne's summary page showing $85,000 in personal debt, documented across 4 credit cards, all in his name, all predating the business loan by 6 months. I heard her take a shaky breath. He just stared at it, she continued, like he couldn't believe it was real. But he couldn't say it was wrong, Elodie. He couldn't claim it was a mistake or a miscalculation. He gave Wayne those records himself. Every statement, every account number, every balance. It all came from documents he voluntarily submitted to prove he was financially sound. The proof came from his own hand. What did he say when you asked him about it? I said. He stammered through this weak explanation, Saskia said. Told me he didn't want me to worry. Said the debt was under control, that he had a plan to pay it down once the expansion succeeded. All deflection. No real answers. So I asked him point blank, were you ever going to tell me, or was I supposed to find out after we got married? Did he answer? He said he was going to tell me when the timing was right, Saskia said, and I could hear the anger threading through her voice now. when the timing was right. Like there's a good time to tell your fiancé. You've been hiding $85,000 in debt since before you met her. I didn't say anything. There wasn't anything to say that she didn't already know. Then I asked the question that broke him. Saskia said. I looked at him and said, "What else have you hidden from me?" And Elodie. He went completely silent. I watched him do the math in his head, figuring out what Wayne already found versus what he could still hide. Trying to calculate how much truth he had to tell versus how much he could still bury. How do you unknow someone's lies? He couldn't lie anymore, Saskia continued. Not with the audit sitting right there. Every answer he gave me could be verified against documented proof. So, I saw this look cross his face. Resignation, maybe, or just exhaustion from 3 years of keeping track of what he'd told to whom. What did you ask him? I said quietly. I asked about the loan guarantee, Saskia said. Wayne's report mentioned your name, sole guarantor who declined renewal in April. I wanted to hear Corbin explain what that meant. I wanted him to tell me in his own words what you'd done for him that he'd never mentioned to me. My apartment was very quiet. Outside, someone's car alarm went off and then stopped. He told you, I said. It wasn't a question. He told me everything, Saskia said. Sat there at his kitchen table with Wayne's report in front of him and confessed that you guaranteed the entire business loan. $620,000. Sole guarantor. Full personal liability. You signed in March 2021 when he opened the first location, and you carried that risk for 3 years while he opened 2 more restaurants and planned a 4th. I closed my eyes. 3 years, Saskia repeated. Your sister carried the financial liability for his entire business for 3 years. And every time he told me about building his empire, every time he talked about being self-made, about building from nothing, you were there in the background carrying the risk that made it all possible. He didn't want to admit he needed help, I said. He built his whole identity on not needing help, Saskia corrected. He told me he was self-funded. He told my parents he'd secured financing on his own merit. He posted on Instagram about grinding and building from zero and being his own foundation. And the entire time, his sister was guaranteeing $647,000 of debt that could have destroyed your financial future if anything went wrong. She paused. I heard her shift in her seat, heard the creak of leather. What else did you do for him that he never told me about? She asked. I thought about my mother's folder. The 3 years of documentation. The pattern of concealment that stretched back further than Saskia knew. I carried what he asked me to carry, I said. And I stopped when it became clear he'd never planned to carry it himself. Tomorrow's meeting, Saskia said. My father is going to ask him direct questions with Wayne's audit as reference. Corbin won't be able to rewrite the story this time. The numbers are documented. Your guarantee is public record. His debt is traced and verified. His story had always needed an editor. I'd just been cut from the draft. Will you be there? Saskia asked. When he has to say it all in front of my father? When he has to admit that everything he built was built on support, he spent 3 years pretending he never received? I looked at the ceiling of my apartment, at the water stain in the corner I'd been meaning to have fixed for months. Yes, I said. I'll be there. I arrived at Glenn Delaney's office at 9:50 Tuesday morning. By noon, it was over. Corbin had sat across from Wayne's findings, from Saskia's questions, from Glenn's withdrawal of support. The investment was off. The truth was documented. When Corbin called Tuesday afternoon, The difference was in what he didn't say. No demands, no accusations, no certainty. "Can we talk?" he asked. His voice was quiet, stripped of confidence. "Just talk?" I sat down on my couch. "I'm listening." Long pause. I heard him breathing, traffic in the background like he was sitting in his car. "Is there any way to fix this?" he said finally. "To make it work?" The question hung between us. Not angry, not demanding, just uncertain, seeking help rather than expecting it, but still asking, still hoping I might solve the problem he'd created. He still thought I could save him. "I didn't break anything, Corbin," I said calmly. "I just stopped carrying what was never mine to hold." "But the loan, you created the situation," I said. "The bank approved the original loan with my guarantee. I honored that for 3 years. When renewal came, I made a legal choice not to extend. The consequences you're facing are the natural result of your choices, not something I inflicted." Silence. "You had 85,000 in personal debt when you asked me to guarantee 620,000 more," I continued. "You never told me. Never told Saskia. Asked Glenn for money while hiding existing obligations. These aren't consequences I created. They're consequences you earned." I heard him exhale slowly. "Was it the toast?" he asked, voice different now, smaller, searching. "What I said at the Delaney dinner? Is that why you did this?" I closed my eyes. The toast at the Delaney dinner. The moment he called me invisible while celebrating the business I'd been guaranteeing. He'd been telling himself this story, that I'd done all of this out of wounded pride. Revenge for one careless comment. "I did this because I finally saw what you really think of the person holding you up," I said quietly. "The toast didn't make me invisible. I already was. To you. For 3 years. I didn't mean—" "I know," I said. "That's the problem. Invisibility isn't inflicted. It's bestowed by those who look away. You talked about building from nothing," I continued. "Being self-made, posted about grinding alone, and the entire time, I was guaranteeing $647,000 of your debt. You didn't mean to erase me from the story. You just never saw me in it to begin with." I didn't respond. Car horn in the background, him shifting in his seat. "I'm not doing this to punish you," I said. "I'm doing this because I finally understood that carrying your weight wasn't helping you. It was just teaching you that someone always would." The call ended quietly. No anger. Just the sound of him hanging up. 2 days later, Thursday afternoon, I visited my parents' home in Germantown. My mother was in this kitchen. My father was in the living room reading the newspaper, folded to the business section. He looked up when I walked in. "Elodie," he said. "Can we talk? Just the two of us?" First time. My father had sought me out specifically since everything started. I followed him to the small study at the back of the house, the room with bookshelves and my high school debate trophies gathering dust. I sat in the desk chair. I sat on the small sofa. My father looked older. 68, but today he looked at something uncertain in his expression I'd never seen before. "I didn't know what you'd been carrying," he said finally. "For 3 years. I should have known." I didn't say anything. "Your mother told me Tuesday," he continued. "After Glenn's office. She showed me documentation, records she'd been keeping. Things I should have asked about but didn't." He folded his hands on the desk. "I thought success had to look like something," he said quietly. "Like what Corbin was building. Restaurants, expansion, headlines. I didn't see what was holding it up, because it didn't look like what I expected success to look like." I met his eyes. It did look like something, Dad. It looked like Corbin's business. I went very still. My success was invisible because it was holding up someone else's visibility. I said. You weren't wrong to see Corbin's restaurants. You were just wrong to think that's all there was to see. My father nodded slowly, something shifting in his face. Understanding incomplete but real. Acknowledgement without full apology. I'm sorry I didn't see what that cost you, he said. It wasn't vindication. It wasn't reconciliation. Just truth. Stated plainly, carrying the weight of years, he couldn't undo the kind of victory that tastes almost like loss. Thank you, I said quietly. We sat there for a moment in the study, with afternoon light through the window and dust particles visible in the air between us. My father's acknowledgement wasn't triumphant. It was quieter, sadder, incomplete. He saw what he'd missed, but couldn't undo the years of not seeing it. Recognition without reconciliation. Awareness without absolution. But there was still one conversation left to have. The conversation I'd expected never came. Instead, what came was something different. Saskia called the following week with news I hadn't expected. Corbin had signed a loan in his name only. He got a loan, she said. I could hear the cautious optimism in her voice. Not what he wanted, 180,000, instead of the big expansion he'd planned. But it's in his name only. No guarantor. No one else on the hook if it fails. I sat down at my kitchen table. Where did he find a lender? Regional bank, Saskia said. One that specializes in small business lending. The terms are brutal high interest, personal collateral, tight repayment schedule. But it's actually his risk, his responsibility. First time in 3 years he's operating without someone else holding the bottom. What's he doing with it? I asked. Scaled way down, she said. The mainline location is opening, but it may be half the original scope. Simpler build-out, smaller dining room, limited menu. He's cutting every corner he can without compromising quality. And here's the part that surprised me. He's doing some of the work himself. Painting, minor construction, installing fixtures. I've never seen him actually build something with his hands before. I tried to picture my brother in work clothes, holding a paintbrush instead of a phone. The image felt foreign. How does he seem? I asked. That's the weird part, Saskia said, and I heard her pause like she was choosing her words carefully. He seems lighter, less stressed than when he had bigger plans and hidden backing. Like the smaller version with no secrets, weighs less than the big lie did. Truth, it turned out, weighed less than pretending. He's sleeping better, Saskia continued. Not checking his phone every 5 minutes, not defensive when I ask questions. I think maybe the pressure of maintaining the illusion was harder than just operating within his actual means. I thought about that. 3 years of Corbin presenting himself as self-made, while standing on support he never acknowledged. The constant vigilance required to keep stories straight, to make sure the right people didn't talk to each other, to hide the scaffolding that held up the image. Maybe collapse had brought a kind of relief, the exhausting performance finally over. There's something else, Saskia said, her tone shifting. About the wedding. I waited. I'm going through with it, she said, but not like before. Not on blind trust. What do you mean? I spent the last week thinking, Saskia said. Talked to my mom, talked to a therapist, talked to myself at 3 in the morning when I couldn't sleep. And I decided, if I'm marrying him knowing exactly who he is, not who he claimed to be. Which means the foundation has to change completely. She was building a marriage on bedrock instead of the stories he'd told about it. I told him my conditions, Saskia continued. Non-negotiable requirements for moving forward. Complete financial transparency from now on. Joint quarterly financial reviews. We sit down together and go through everything. Every account, every obligation. No debt undertaken without mutual discussion. Shared access to all accounts, business and personal. Full partnership or no partnership. How did he respond? I asked. He agreed, she said. Immediately. No pushback, no negotiation, no asking to soften the terms. He just said he understood and that he'd do it. Do you believe him? I think he's tired of hiding, Saskia said. The debt, the guarantee, the constant management of who knows what. I think transparency might actually be easier than the alternative. And I made it clear, this isn't punishment. This is the minimum requirement for partnership. I need to know what we're partnering in. I heard her take a breath. I'm not naive, she said. I know trust doesn't rebuild overnight. But I also know that some relationships can't survive in the dark. If we're doing this, we're doing it with eyes open. Real numbers, real obligations, real partnership built on what's actually there, not what he wishes were there. That's a different marriage than the one he proposed, I said quietly. Yes, Saskia agreed. It is. The marriage I'm entering has nothing to do with the self-made success story he told me when we met. It's smaller, messier, more complicated. But it's real. And I'd rather have a real partnership than a beautiful lie. I looked out my kitchen window at the street below. Evening light. People walking home from work. Ordinary lives proceeding at ordinary scale. You're marrying him knowing exactly who he is, I said. Not who he claimed to be. Exactly, Saskia said. If we're doing this, we're doing it with full information. He failed the test of blind trust. But maybe we can build something on informed trust instead. Trust that's earned through sustained transparency, not assumed through projected confidence. Some relationships survive the truth. Others require it. I think that's the right choice, I said. For you, I mean. The choice that honors what you actually want instead of what you thought you wanted. Thank you, Saskia said quietly. That means something, coming from you. After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table as the light faded outside. Saskia had done what I'd never managed: chosen relationship over image, demanded reality over narrative. The wedding would happen, but the marriage she was entering bore no resemblance to the one Corbin had described when he first proposed. She'd traded his illusion for their truth, and I realized I had my own future to consider. My future, I decided, would include boundaries I'd never needed to articulate before. I drafted the policy on a Tuesday afternoon at my desk, the way I'd draft any professional framework. Clear terms, documented limits, protection built in. The document was simple. 1 page. Title at the top. Personal Financial Assistance Policy. Not for distribution, not for enforcement by anyone else. Just for me. A framework for any future family financial requests, should they come. Requirements. Documented terms in writing. Time limits established up front. Clear repayment schedules if applicable. No open-ended guarantees. No commitments I couldn't see the end of. Right to decline without explanation. Help if I chose to help, but never again carry what I couldn't release when necessary. I treated family requests like business proposals, not from lack of love, but to protect the peace that made love sustainable. Writing it down, I waited for guilt to arrive, for the voice that would tell me this was cold, unfeeling, the kind of policy that proved I'd hardened into someone who valued money over family. But the guilt didn't come. Instead, I felt relief. Protection isn't the same as punishment. The boundaries I was creating didn't feel like walls against my family. They felt like frameworks for sustainable relationship. I wasn't refusing to help people I loved. I was defining the shape that help could take without consuming me. Love doesn't require blindness. Support doesn't mean surrender. This isn't cruelty, I thought. It's sustainability. I added specific terms to the document. Maximum commitment duration, 3 years. Required documentation. Written agreement, signed by all parties. Mutual consent. Both sides must agree to all terms before commitment begins. Right to review. Annual check-ins to reassess viability. Right to decline. No explanation owed. No justification required. Future help would be a gift given consciously, not an obligation assumed silently. I saved the document, printed a copy, filed it in my personal records drawer at home. Then I pulled out the thick folder I'd been keeping for 3 years. Copies of the original guarantee agreement, renewal documents, correspondence with Patricia Harrison at the bank, emails with Teresa Irvine, my attorney, the formal declination letter I'd sent in April. Everything related to Corbin's loan, to the $647,000 I'd carried as personal liability from March 2021 until April 2024. I placed the papers in a manila folder. Wrote, Business Guarantee 2021-4. Closed. On the tab in black marker. Filed it in the cabinet with other archived documents. Closing the file felt like setting down weight I'd forgotten I could release. I stood there in my apartment for a moment, looking at the closed cabinet drawer. 3 years of my financial life, reduced to one folder in alphabetical order between bank statements and car insurance. No longer active burden. Now just history. I felt lighter than I had in 3 years. The following Saturday, my mother texted, Dinner Sunday? Just family. No occasion. No performance. Just us. I read the message twice. First family meal together since everything had unfolded. Week before the wedding. No celebration planned. No agenda announced. Just dinner. I hesitated, then typed back. What time? 5, she replied. Casual. Sunday evening. I drove to my mother's house in Germantown. The same row home where we'd had the conversation about her documentation, where my father had offered his incomplete acknowledgement. I parked on the street and walked up the steps, carrying a bottle of wine I'd picked up that afternoon. My mother answered the door. Elodie, come in. The house smelled like roasted chicken and rosemary. My father was setting the table in the dining room. Corbin was already there, standing by the window with a glass of water, looking less certain than I'd ever seen him look in a family setting. No performance, no page entry. Just 4 people gathering to eat. We sat down. My mother served. The conversation started quietly. Weather, traffic, the upcoming week. Different energy than that dinner months ago. Less projection, less performance. More honesty, or at least more awareness. My father asked me about work. How's that consulting project you mentioned? The healthcare system redesign? I looked at him, surprised. It's going well. Complex stakeholder management, but we're making progress." He nodded, actually listening. Asked a follow-up question about implementation challenges. We talked about it for 5 minutes. He didn't redirect to Corbin's business. He just listened to my answer. Later, unprompted, Corbin said, "Your advisory work. How do you evaluate when a client's plan is actually viable versus just optimistic?" I met his eyes across the table. The question was genuine, not performative. Real interest, or at least real effort. "I look at what they're not saying," I said, "what they're hiding from themselves." Corbin nodded slowly. "That makes sense." My mother caught my eye from across the table and smiled slightly. Recognition of the shift. This wasn't Hollywood reconciliation. Corbin hadn't transformed overnight. My family hadn't erased years of imbalance with one dinner. But the conversation was happening with eyes open now. Respect shown in small gestures, genuine questions, actual listening, acknowledgement that didn't require crisis to appear. Real change tends to whisper where fantasy shouts. Progress measured not in grand apologies, but in the fact that my father asked about my work and waited for my answer. That Corbin spoke to me about professional judgment without defensive comparison. That my mother orchestrated a dinner with no agenda except presence. The dinner ended without drama, without declarations, without the sweeping reconciliation I'd once imagined needing. Corbin asked about my work. Dad listened to my answer. Mom smiled when she caught my eye. Progress wasn't a moment, it was this, a Sunday evening where I existed in my family without disappearing into someone else's story. And for the first time in 3 years, that felt like enough. That feeling being enough stayed with me through the days that followed. The wedding happened on a Saturday in late May. Sunlight turning the Brandywine Valley estate into something out of a magazine Saskia would never buy. Small gathering. Immediate family, close friends. The Delaney family seated at tables arranged under white tents overlooking rolling hills. The ceremony had been simple, honest, stripped of the pageantry Corbin might have chosen 3 months ago. Saskia wore ivory silk. Corbin wore a navy suit and an expression I'd never seen on him before. Genuine humility mixed with something that looked like gratitude. The reception felt different from that dinner months ago. Lighter. More honest. Conversation flowed without the undercurrent of performance, without the careful choreography of who got acknowledged when. Toasts began after dinner. Glenn spoke first, brief, gracious, welcoming Corbin into their family while making it clear the welcome came with expectations. Marlene followed with stories about Saskia's childhood that made everyone laugh. My mother offered a simple blessing. My father raised his glass to new beginnings built on solid foundations. Then Corbin stood. I held his champagne glass and looked around the tent at Saskia first, then at her parents, then at our parents, then at me. "I want to thank my sister Elodie," he said, and the tent went quiet. She believed in me before I'd proven anything. She supported me when I couldn't see what that cost her. And she taught me what real partnership looks like, even when I was too blind to recognize it. This time, when he raised his glass, he saw me. The acknowledgement was public, direct. A callback to the toast at the Delaney dinner months ago where he had made me invisible while celebrating the business I'd been guaranteeing. Except this time, Corbin was the one correcting the record. Not performatively, not as strategy, just as truth stated plainly in front of everyone who mattered. I raised my glass. nodded once. I didn't need a speech in return, didn't require the spotlight. The recognition mattered not because it was public, but because it was true. My mother caught my eye across the table and smiled. My father nodded. Saskia reached over and squeezed my hand briefly before Corbin sat back down. Closure without drama. Recognition without fanfare. Just acknowledgement, finally, of what had always been there. The evening proceeded. Conversation flowed honestly. Questions asked and actually answered. Stories told without embellishment. Later, Glenn approached me near the dessert table. Saskia mentioned your consulting practice, he said. Business advisory work, strategic planning. That's right, I said. I may have referrals for you, he said. People in my network who value discretion and integrity. If you're taking new clients, always, I said. He nodded, respect between professionals who understood that competence spoke louder than performance. I'll be in touch. The wedding celebrated a beginning built on transparency instead of illusion. Different foundation than Corbin had originally envisioned, but stronger for being real. Beginnings built on truth look different than those built on stories. 2 months later, on a Monday morning in mid-July, I sat at my office desk preparing for a new client consultation. Daniel Brennan, manufacturing business owner, considering expansion, seeking advisory services. The calendar note showed he'd come through a referral from Glenn Delaney's business network. He arrived at 10. Mid-50s, graying hair, wearing khakis and a polo shirt, like someone who'd built a business through work rather than image. He shook my hand firmly and sat down across from my desk. Thank you for meeting with me, he said. Glenn Delaney's colleague mentioned you handled a sensitive family financial situation with exceptional discretion and integrity. That's exactly what I need. I felt something shift in my chest. Tell me about your business. He outlined his situation. Successful manufacturing company. Opportunity for expansion. Concern about managing growth without overextending. Family-owned. His 2 sons involved in operations. Questions about succession planning and risk management. He needed someone who could help him navigate complex decisions without making them public before he was ready. I don't need flashy, he said. I need someone who understands that building something sustainable means making hard choices quietly. Someone who values substance over show. I recognized the irony immediately. The qualities Corbin had scorned: quiet professionalism, non-flashy competence, discretion were exactly what attracted the clients I valued. My refusal to perform, my choice of integrity over visibility, had built a reputation with exactly the right people. I didn't need anyone to see. The ones who mattered noticed anyway. I can help with that, I said. As we moved into the consultation, discussing his concerns and my approach, I thought back to that toast at the Delaney dinner in March. Corbin calling me invisible while celebrating the business I'd been guaranteeing. The moment that had crystallized 3 years of being unseen by people who should have noticed. He'd been right. I was invisible, just not to the people who actually mattered. Invisibility was never the problem. It was who was looking. Corbin's world ran on visibility and performance. Instagram posts and grand openings and self-made narratives that required constant maintenance. Mine ran on competence and integrity, on the kind of quiet professionalism that didn't photograph well, but built trust that lasted. For 3 years, I'd carried the weight of his story, held up his visibility while remaining unseen. Now I was building my own foundation. And it turned out the ground I'd been standing on all along was exactly strong enough to support what I wanted to build. The consultation moved forward. Daniel asked thoughtful questions. I provided honest answers. No performance required. No narrative to maintain. Just professional partnership built on mutual respect and shared values. The right people had been watching all along. For 3 years, I told myself I was helping my brother by guaranteeing his loan. But what I was really doing was enabling his illusion while sacrificing my own peace. I made the mistake of thinking that love meant saying yes to everything, that support required silence about my own limits. Don't make that mistake. Real support includes boundaries. Real love tells the truth, even when it's uncomfortable. This might not be the revenge story you expected. No dramatic confrontations, no public scandals. But here's what I learned. The most powerful revenge story isn't about tearing someone else down. It's about refusing to hold yourself down for their comfort. I believe God put me through this to teach me that my worth doesn't depend on being useful to people who can't see me. The lesson isn't about punishing those who take advantage. It's about honoring yourself enough to stop offering what they're not willing to earn. If this revenge story resonated with you, drop a comment and tell me, have you ever had to choose between keeping the peace and protecting yourself? What did you choose? Share this with someone who might need to hear it. And if you want more stories about finding your voice, when family tries to silence it, subscribe to the channel for the next one. Thank you for staying until the very end. I appreciate you being here with me. A final reminder. This story contains some fictionalized details for storytelling and reflection.